The desert sun hung low in the sky, its fading warmth casting a golden haze over the sprawling military base. Private First Class Marcus Shaw wiped the sweat from his brow and adjusted his helmet, the weight of his gear pressing down on his shoulders. It was the end of another grueling training day, one of many that had defined the last 5 months of his life. Despite the exhaustion etched into his muscles, Marcus felt a sense of pride that no amount of fatigue could erase. When he'd enlisted, his decision had been met with mixed emotions. Denise, his wife, had been supportive but worried. 5 months is a long time, Marcus, she had said the night before he left, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to stay strong. Mia and I will miss you so much. Marcus had pulled her close, his embrace steady and reassuring. I'll miss you both more, he replied, his voice soft but resolute. But this is for us, for our future. I'll make you proud. Those words stayed with him, a vow he carried into every grueling drill, every blistering march under the desert sun, and every sleepless night. From the moment he arrived at the base, Marcus threw himself into his duties with determination. The demands were relentless showers spent running under the unforgiving sun, climbing walls with a 50-pound rucksack, and crawling through mud while drill sergeants shouted commands. Marcus welcomed the challenge, letting the thought of Denise and Mia fuel his resolve. With every push-up and every obstacle, he reminded himself that he was doing this for them. The camaraderie among the soldiers became another source of strength. Each man and woman had their own reasons for serving, their own sacrifices and hopes. Together, they formed an unbreakable bond, supporting each other through the grueling days and long nights. Marcus quickly earned the respect of his peers, not just for his work ethic, but for his ability to remain calm and focused even in the most stressful situations. During a particularly intense field exercise, when their squad found themselves lost in an unfamiliar stretch of terrain, it was Marcus who rallied the group, using his keen sense of direction to guide them back to camp. His squadmates nicknamed him Compass, a title he wore with quiet pride. During rare moments of downtime, the barracks hummed with laughter and the sound of letters being read aloud. Marcus joined in, sharing stories about his family, how Mia's laughter could light up a room, how she would cling to his leg and beg for just one more story before bed. He spoke of Denise's warm smile and the meals she made that turned ordinary evenings into something special. Man, you've got it good, Specialist Ramirez had said one night as they cleaned their rifles. A wife like that and a little girl waiting for you? That's the dream. Marcus had smiled, his heart swelling. Yeah, I am lucky, he replied. That's why I am here, to make sure they've got everything they need. This uniform? It's for them. When he wasn't with his squad, Marcus poured his thoughts into letters for Denise and Mia. He wrote about the camaraderie, the demanding training, and how much he missed them. In return, Denise's letters became his lifeline. She wrote about Mia's latest antics, included photos that made his chest ache with longing, and reminded him how proud they were of him. She's been drawing pictures for you, Denise wrote in one letter. They're mostly stick figures, but she always makes sure to draw you with a big smile. She keeps saying, Daddy's happy to come home. And she's right, you will be. As the weeks turned into months, Marcus marked his calendar, each X bringing him closer to the day he could hold them again. The base was abuzz with excitement as the end of their deployment neared. For Marcus, the anticipation was tinged with nervousness. What if things had changed? What if he had changed? On the morning of his departure, Marcus stood with his squad one last time, their boots kicking up dust as they formed a neat line for the debriefing. The commanding officer addressed them, his voice carrying the weight of respect. You've shown discipline and dedication over these past months. You leave here as soldiers and as examples of what it means to serve with honor. When the transport vehicles rolled in to take them away, Marcus turned to Ramirez and clapped him on the shoulder. Take care of yourself, man, he said. You too, Compass, Ramirez replied with a grin. And give that little girl of yours a hug for me. As the plane touched down on familiar soil, Marcus's heart raced. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but the reality of it, felt almost surreal. The drive to his house was quiet, every mile bringing him closer to the life he'd been dreaming of. When he finally pulled into the driveway, the sight of the familiar porch light, glowing softly against the twilight, sent a wave of emotion crashing over him. He sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel as he tried to steady his breath. This was it. Gathering his things, Marcus walked to the door, his heart pounding in anticipation. "I am home," he called out, his voice thick with emotion. The house was quiet. The house was too quiet, oppressive, wrapping around Marcus like a heavy shroud. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. The faint smell of lavender lingered in the air. Denise's favorite scent. It tugged at the corners of his memory, blending familiarity with unease. Something felt off. "Denise? Mia?" he called, his voice echoing faintly through the stillness. His boots, scuffed and dusty from his time overseas, creaked against the polished hardwood floors as he ventured further into the house. The rooms were neat, everything in its place, yet there was a strange hollowness to it all, as if the home itself was holding its breath. The living room was bathed in the dim glow of the evening sun filtering through sheer curtains. On the mantel, the family photos stood as they always had, snapshots of a life he cherished. His eyes lingered on a photo of Mia, her gap-toothed smile beaming as she held up the crayon drawing she'd made for his birthday last year. He smiled, but the warmth of it faltered as the unease tightened its grip on him. He made his way to the kitchen, where he found a note pinned to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. "Ran to the store with Mia. Be back soon. Love you." The words were simple, yet they carried a weight he couldn't quite place. He traced his fingers over the familiar handwriting, but instead of comfort, a pang of doubt gnawed at him. It wasn't like Denise to leave without more of a welcome, especially after 5 months apart. She'd been counting down the days in her letters, promising a big celebration upon his return. Where was the excitement she'd written about? The balloons and the cake Mia had supposedly been planning for weeks? Marcus shook his head, trying to push the doubts aside. Maybe he was overthinking it. Maybe Denise and Mia were just running late, caught up in the whirlwind of errands and excitement. He decided to wait. He headed upstairs, his feet moving instinctively toward Mia's room. The door was slightly ajar, and he pushed it open gently, the creak of the hinges breaking the silence. Her room was a sanctuary of innocence, painted in soft pastels and decorated with posters of cartoon characters. Her bed was neatly made, the comforter tucked just as Denise always did it. On the bedside table was a pile of Bookshire favorite bedtime stories. He picked one up, The Adventures of Captain Paws, and smiled. He had read it to her so many times that he could recite entire passages from memory. A sudden rush of emotion welled up inside him, a longing so fierce it almost overwhelmed him. He missed her tiny voice, her laughter, the way she'd fall asleep in his lap while he read. His chest tightened at the thought of holding her again, hearing her call him daddy as she ran into his arms. But as he stood there, the unease crept back in, colder and sharper than before. Something about the house felt wrong. The silence wasn't the warm, welcoming kind he had imagined. It was heavy, like a storm cloud hovering just out of sight. He moved to the master bedroom, where he noticed the bed was made, but the sheets were tucked in too neatly, different from how Denise usually left them. He opened the closet and saw her clothes hanging in perfect rows, but there were fewer of them than he remembered. His duffel bag thudded against the floor as he sat on the edge of the bed, running his hands through his hair. The house was familiar, yet it felt like a stranger, holding secrets he couldn't see but could sense all too well. He was trained to spot anomalies, to recognize when something was out of place. And this didn't feel like home. As the minutes ticked by, the quiet became unbearable. He decided to busy himself, unpacking his things and arranging them neatly in the room. His military training had instilled a need for order, and it helped steady his nerves. He pulled out his shaving kit, his carefully folded uniform, and a small box of mementos he'd collected during his deployment. Among them was a framed photo of Denise and Mia, taken just before he left. He placed it on the nightstand, the sight of their smiling faces stirring a mix of love and apprehension. An hour passed, then another. The sunlight faded, and the house grew darker, the shadows stretching long across the walls. Marcus glanced at his watch, the tick of its hands suddenly loud in the stillness. They should have been home by now. The faint rumble of a car engine broke the silence. Marcus stood, his heart leaping as he hurried to the window. A familiar sedan pulled into the driveway, and relief washed over him. He rushed to the front door, throwing it open as Denise stepped out of the car, Mia in tow. "Daddy!" Mia's voice rang out, pure and bright, as she spotted him. She broke into a run, her little feet pounding against the pavement as she launched herself into his arms. He caught her, lifting her high and holding her close as her laughter bubbled against his neck. "I missed you so much, Daddy," she said, her small arms wrapped tightly around him. "I missed you more," Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. He kissed the top of her head, inhaling the familiar scent of her shampoo. For a moment, the unease melted away, replaced by the overwhelming joy of holding his daughter again. Denise approached, her smile warm but strained. "Welcome home," she said, leaning in to kiss his cheek. "Sorry we weren't here when you arrived. Things have been busy." Marcus studied her face, searching for something he couldn't quite name. "It's good to be back," he said, his tone cautious. "I've been counting the days." "So have we," Denise replied, though her eyes darted away as she spoke. She gestured toward the car. "Let me get the groceries." "I'll help," Marcus offered, setting Mia down gently. She clung to his leg, her small hand gripping his pants as if she feared he might vanish again. As they unloaded the car, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows in the house weren't the only ones lingering. There was a tension in Denise's movements, a guardedness in her tone, that set his instincts on edge. The reunion he had dreamed of didn't feel as complete as it should have. Something was wrong that evening, and the family sat together in the living room, the faint hum of the television filling the air. Marcus had craved this scene for months. Mia curled up on the couch with her favorite stuffed bear, Denise flipping through a magazine, and the soft glow of a lamp casting a warm light over the room. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Mia had been quieter than usual, her laughter less frequent and her movements subdued. Marcus chalked it up to nerves. 5 months was a long time for a child to be apart from their father. Still, the unease lingered. "Mia, come sit with me," Marcus said, patting the cushion beside him. She hesitated for a moment before hopping over, her small frame settling against his side. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "What's this, kiddo?" Marcus asked, brushing a strand of her hair aside. That's when he noticed either face looked oddly flushed, her cheeks and eyelids unusually vibrant. He squinted, leaning in to get a closer look, and realized with a start that it wasn't natural. "Are you wearing makeup?" he asked, his tone a mix of confusion and concern. Mia tensed beside him, her gaze dropping to her lap. "Mom said it's okay," she mumbled. Marcus glanced over at Denise, who had gone still, her hands tightening around the edges of the magazine. "Denise," he said, his voice sharp. "She wanted to play dress-up," Denise said quickly, her smile tight. "It's harmless, Marcus. Just let her have her fun." But Marcus wasn't convinced. He turned back to Mia, tilting her chin gently so he could see her face more clearly. "Sweetheart, you don't need all this," he said softly. "You are beautiful, just the way you are. Why don't you go wash it off? You are still my little girl, right?" Mia hesitated, glancing toward her mother as if seeking permission. Denise gave a stiff nod, and Mia slipped off the couch, her stuffed bear clutched tightly in one hand as she shuffled toward the bathroom. Marcus watched her go, his stomach knotting. "Why is she wearing makeup?" he asked, his voice low. "I told you," Denise replied, her tone defensive. "It's just a game." She wanted to try it. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with her answer. Something about the situation didn't sit right with him. He stood, his instincts guiding him toward the bathroom. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear the sound of running water. He knocked lightly before stepping inside. Mia stood on her tiptoes at the sink, a damp washcloth in her hands as she scrubbed at her face. "Need help?" Marcus asked gently. She shook her head but didn't look at him. As the makeup washed away, Marcus's breath caught in his throat. Beneath the layers of foundation and blush, dark bruises bloomed across her skin. Purple and yellow splotches marred her delicate cheeks, and a faint cut ran along her jawline. "Mia," Marcus said, his voice shaking, "what happened to your face?" She froze, her tiny hands gripping the edge of the sink. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over as she turned to face him. "Two fell," she stammered. "That's not a fall," Marcus said firmly, crouching down to her level. "Sweetheart, you can tell me the truth. Did someone hurt you?" Mia's lower lip trembled, and she cast a fearful glance toward the door. "Mom said not to tell," she whispered. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of rage and dread twisting inside him. "Mia, tell me what happened," he urged, his voice steady but insistent. She sniffled, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to," she admitted. "In your room. Mom was with a man. They were doing something weird. I walked in, and he got mad." Marcus's blood ran cold. "What did he do?" Mia hesitated, her small fingers twisting the hem of her shirt. He hit me. Mom said if I told anyone he'd destroy me." The words hit Marcus like a freight train, the air leaving his lungs in a rush. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't think. Then, like a switch flipping, his military training took over. His mind became a razor's edge, cutting through the fog of emotion to focus on one thing: protecting his daughter. "No one is ever going to hurt you again," Marcus said, his voice low and fierce. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as she sobbed against his chest. "I promise, Mia. No one." He stayed with her until she calmed, his own resolve hardening with every shaky breath she took. When she finally drifted off to sleep, clutching her stuffed bear, Marcus rose and left the room. Denise was waiting in the hallway, her arms crossed defensively. "Is she okay?" she asked, her voice tight. Marcus stared at her, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk," he said. Denise flinched under the weight of his gaze, her composure slipping. "Marcus, I can explain." "Save it," he snapped, his tone icy. "You let this happen to our daughter. You let this happen." Denise opened her mouth to respond, but Marcus was already moving past her, his mind a storm of fury and determination. He didn't know who this man was or why Denise had allowed him into their lives, but one thing was certain: whoever had hurt Mia in the dimly lit kitchen, his hands braced against the counter as he fought to keep his anger in check. Denise hovered near the doorway, her arms crossed defensively, her face pale. The weight of the silence between them was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. "Who is he?" Marcus finally asked, his voice low but laced with barely controlled fury. He didn't look at her, staring instead at the countertop, as if it might hold the answer he already dreaded hearing. Denise's breath hitched, and she glanced nervously toward the stairs where Mia was asleep. "Marcus, please," she said, her voice trembling. "Let it go. It's over. He's not a threat anymore." "Not a threat?" Marcus turned to face her, his eyes blazing. "Denise, our daughter is covered in bruises because of this man. He hit her, and you want me to just let it go?" Tears spilled down Denise's cheeks as she shook her head. "I didn't know he'd hurt her. I swear, Marcus, I didn't. He promised he'd never. I didn't think." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. "Who is he?" Marcus repeated, enunciating each word with deliberate precision. Denise hesitated, her shoulders trembling. "His name is Todd Harris," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "We met at the gym. It wasn't supposed to be anything serious, but he said all the right things, and I made a mistake." Marcus's jaw tightened, his fists clenching at his sides. He took a step closer to her, his voice cold and measured. "You let a stranger into my house, around my daughter, and now you are telling me to let it go? No, Denise, that's not happening." "Marcus, please." Denise begged, her eyes wide and pleading. He has kids. A family. You can't just show up there and… I'll handle it, Marcus interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. You've done enough. Denise reached for him, but he brushed past her, grabbing his phone from the counter. His hands were steady as he scrolled through his contacts and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Wilson? A gruff voice answered on the other end. Hey, it's Marcus, he said, his voice curt. I need a favor. There was a pause, then a low chuckle. Marcus Shaw, thought you were off playing hero overseas. What kind of favor are we talking about? I need you to run a name through the system, Marcus said. Todd Harris. Find me everything, address, background, anything you've got. Sounds serious, Wilson replied, his tone shifting. You in some kind of trouble? Just do it for me, Wilson, Marcus said. Give me a few minutes. The line went dead, and Marcus leaned against the wall, his thoughts racing. Denise hovered nearby, wringing her hands. Marcus, you don't have to do this, she said softly. He's not worth it. Marcus turned to her, his expression hard. He made himself worth it the second he laid a hand on Mia. The phone buzzed in his hand, and he answered immediately. Got an address for you, Wilson said. Place in the suburbs. Sending it to you now. Thanks, Marcus replied, ending the call as his phone buzzed again with a text containing the address. Without another word, he grabbed his keys and headed for the door. Denise followed him, her voice rising in panic. Marcus, think about this, she pleaded. If you go there, if you do something, you could ruin everything. He paused in the doorway, his silhouette stark against the porch light. The only thing I am thinking about is protecting my daughter. The drive to the address was a blur, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as the streetlights passed in rapid succession. His mind was a storm of rage and purpose, the thought of Todd Harris's face igniting a fire in his chest. He didn't know what he would say or do when he got there, but he knew one thing. Harris would understand the consequences of his actions. The GPS announced his arrival, and Marcus slowed the car, pulling to a stop a few houses down from the address. He killed the engine and sat there for a moment, taking in the sight of the two-story house. It was eerily ordinary white siding, a well-kept lawn, children's toys scattered across the yard. And there he was. Todd Harris sat on the porch, a mug in one hand, as he watched two young children play in the yard. He looked relaxed, his face calm and unbothered, as if he hadn't a care in the world. Marcus clenched his jaw, his hand gripping the door handle. His pulse pounded in his ears as he stepped out of the car, his boots crunching against the pavement. The cool evening air did little to quell the heat rising in his chest. Harris glanced up, his brow furrowing, as he noticed Marcus approaching. He set his mug down on the small table beside him, his expression shifting to guarded curiosity. Marcus's eyes burned into him, every step bringing him closer to the man who had shattered his family's peace. His hands curled into fists at his sides, his entire body coiled with tension. And then he stopped, standing at the edge of the porch, his gaze locked on Harris. The children's laughter faded into the background as the two men stared at each other, the unspoken weight of the moment hanging in time as Marcus stared at Todd Harris, who rose slowly from his chair on the porch. There was a faint smirk on Harris's face, one that barely masked his confusion at the sight of a stranger storming toward him with unrelenting purpose. "Can I help you?" Harris asked, his tone casual, as if he weren't the reason Marcus's world had been turned upside down. "You know exactly who I am," Marcus said, his voice low and steady, every syllable weighted with fury. Harris's smirk faltered as understanding dawned. His gaze flicked toward the street, then back to Marcus. "Look, man, I don't want any trouble," he said, raising his hands defensively. "Whatever this is, let's talk." But Marcus wasn't interested in talking. The weeks of betrayal, the pain his daughter had endured, the lies his wife had told of it surged through him like a tidal wave. Without another word, he lunged forward, his fist connecting with Harris's jaw with a force that sent the man staggering backward into the porch railing. "You hurt my daughter," Marcus growled, his voice barely human as he grabbed Harris by the collar and slammed him against the wall. "You think you can get away with that?" Harris tried to push Marcus off, his arms flailing in desperation, but Marcus's grip was unrelenting. Every muscle honed during his military service came alive as he drove Harris to the ground, pinning him beneath his weight. "You don't understand," Harris began. But Marcus cut him off with a sharp punch to the gut that left him gasping for air. "I understand perfectly," Marcus said, his voice cold. "You are a coward who thinks he can lay his hands on an 8-year-old girl and walk away unscathed." Harris struggled, his eyes wide with fear, as Marcus's strength overwhelmed him. They grappled across the porch, the sound of their fight drawing curious glances from neighbors, though none dared to intervene. Marcus landed blow after blow, each one fueled by the image of Mia's tear-streaked face and the bruises that marred her innocent beauty. When Harris finally stopped resisting, his body slumping in defeat, Marcus hauled him to his feet and shoved him into the porch railing. Blood trickled from the corner of Harris's mouth, and his breath came in ragged gasps. "You are going to apologize," Marcus said, his voice low but commanding. Harris blinked, dazed. "What?" "You are going to look me in the eye," Marcus continued, "and admit what you did. Then you are going to apologize to my daughter for what you've put her through." Harris hesitated, his gaze darting toward the house where his children peeked out from behind the curtain. "Please," he rasped. "Not in front of my kids." Marcus grabbed him by the shirt and yanked him forward. "You should have thought about that before you laid a hand on mine." Defeated, Harris nodded, his shoulders slumping. "I'm sorry," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "Louder," Marcus demanded. "I am sorry," Harris said, his voice cracking. "I was wrong, okay? I never should have. I am sorry." Marcus released him with a shove, stepping back as Harris crumpled onto the porch. For a moment, Marcus stood there, his chest heaving as he stared at the man before him. Then he turned and walked away without a word, the weight of his anger giving way to a grim satisfaction. Back in the car, Marcus gripped the steering wheel tightly as he drove home. The house was silent when he entered, but Denise was waiting for him in the kitchen, her face pale and tear-streaked. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice trembling. Marcus didn't answer. He grabbed her by the arm, not roughly, but firmly enough to leave no room for argument. "Come with me," he said. "Marcus, please," she begged, trying to pull away. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "Save it," Marcus snapped, dragging her toward the door. "You are going to face the consequences of what you've done." Denise protested, but Marcus was unmoved. He led her to the car and opened the passenger door, motioning for her to get in. The drive to Harris's house was silent, the tension between them palpable. When they arrived, Marcus pulled into the driveway and turned to Denise. "This is where you belong," he said coldly. "Marcus, don't do this," she pleaded, her voice breaking. But Marcus was done listening. He stepped out of the car, walked around to her side, and opened the door. "Get out." She hesitated, her eyes wide with fear and disbelief. "Now," Marcus commanded. Denise stepped out reluctantly, tears streaming down her face. Marcus grabbed her arm and led her toward the house. Without ceremony, he pushed her forward, letting her stumble onto the porch. Harris, still sitting where Marcus had left him, looked up in shock as Denise landed at his feet. "Take her," Marcus said, his voice devoid of emotion. "She's your mess to clean up now." Without waiting for a response, Marcus turned and walked back to his car. He didn't look back as he drove away, his heart heavy but resolute. His family had been broken, but he had done what he needed to protect the one thing that mattered most, Mia. As the house disappeared in his rearview mirror, Marcus felt a strange sense of closure. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he would rebuild. For his daughter, he would find a way to heal. What would you do in Marcus's shoes? Share your thoughts on his actions, justice, and the emotional weight of this story. Let's discuss.